What is up, guys, and welcome to my review of The Running Man. This is the second film adaptation of the novel written by Stephen King, once known as Richard Bachman, and previously we got it in 1987, which was a big action vehicle for Arnold Schwarzenegger. This time, the story being brought to us by very highly acclaimed director Edgar Wright, with Glenn Powell, one of the biggest rising stars in Hollywood, as the lead role. And going back to kind of establish my relationship with this property, of course, I've said numerous times, I'm not really a big reader, so I've never actually read the Stephen King novel, but I have seen the 1987 film, of course. Arnold Schwarzenegger is, to date, still one of my favorite actors of all time. A lot of his films I grew up on. They were some of the most important and formative films for me developing my movie taste. But that said, The Running Man was never one of my favorites. All of Arnold's dialogue was one-liners. It felt like kind of his less interesting, less impactful one-liners. And I don't know, something about the movie never really resonated for me. So I watched it a couple of days ago for the first time in well over 25 years. And my thoughts haven't really changed on it so much. There's a bit more nostalgia for it, of course, for the movies of that era, but it's still not really one of my favorites. And so I say all of that to establish the fact that it wouldn't have taken a whole lot for a new version of The Running Man to usurp that original and be something that I much prefer. So in a year where Stephen King adaptations seem to be at a huge high, is this yet another win, or is this another iteration of this story that leaves a lot to be desired? And starting off with the positives, what I will say and establish from the beginning is that I do very much prefer this version of The Running Man, and I had a really good time with it. This is a good old-fashioned action movie. This is something where they're taking the concept of the Running Man, and because they have a much higher budget and because of the technological advances of today, they're able to do a much more grand scale and a grand scope iteration of this story, where it literally becomes like a country trotting adventure where Glenn Powell is on the run rather than being just stuck in a little segment of LA that is cornered off like Escape from New York and just going against these 80s cheese boss battles like the original movie. This one is much more about a guy on the run where technology and society is hunting him just as much as the government or this TV network that is putting on this show of The Running Man. And so this guy's on the run trying to stay alive for 30 days to get the grand prize. Now, as I said before, I've never read the novel, so I don't know which version of these movies is more faithful to the novel. Maybe they're both in the novel and they both just kind of went in different directions and which side of the story they decided to bring to the big screen. But to me, this was a much more exciting, much more entertaining, and a much more tension-filled experience of this story. You know, when you have something that is bringing this modern iteration of technology, which isn't really that far in the future from the technology that we have available to us today, where there's drones and there's like DNA sensors on all the streetlights and everything, and of course everybody's on their phones for social media, where there's this extra element of people being brainwashed, people being manipulated and controlled by the media, by propaganda, by the government. They're being used like as drones to facilitate the death and the killing that this show brings. And so I found the version that we got here with Edgar Wright to be a lot more potent and a lot more relevant with its commentary on society, on media, on the government. And it's interesting how a number of Stephen King stories that we have seen adapted this year feel like they are such horrifying concepts in the commentary of society at the time that is all the more relevant today. It just makes you look at today's world and go, dude, what the fuck? Where are we heading? But the story was very thrilling. It's very exciting. Getting a character that you root for with Glenn Powell's character of Ben Richardson as somebody who is, very low income family, and he's just trying to get enough money for his daughter to get the health care that she needs and his family to get some kind of a livable wage. And so he literally goes on this death mission to try to get money for them. And it's not just about who's the most physically fit, who can run away the fastest, who can survive the most carnage. It's about trying to be clever. He's using disguises at certain points. He's trying to hide out. He gets help from certain people that are using basically like underground railroads for the version of this future that we get here. And all the while, The technology of the time and the way that the media manipulates all of its viewers is the biggest threat against him. This message is sponsored by Rincon. Black Friday is around the corner and Rincon audio products are up to 30% off site-wide. From everyday essentials to the latest releases, it's the perfect time to upgrade your sound or get ahead on gifting. Just like a lot of you, I love to listen to music, podcasts, or YouTube videos while I'm doing things around the house. The problem is, before long, earbuds and even headphones start to get a little bit uncomfortable. Not to mention that anytime I'm in my house and I have cut myself off to the rest of whatever's going on, that's the perfect moment for my kids or my dogs to get into things that they're not supposed to. Well, now with Ricon's Essential Open Earbuds, those are both problems of the past. The Essential Open Earbuds are so lightweight that I genuinely forget that I'm even wearing them. They're built for life on the go, so they slip on effortlessly and then stay there all day long. And because I don't completely block out the rest of the world, I can easily hear something else going on in my house that needs my attention, or even hear my name called at a cafe, or if I'm getting ready to walk across the street, I'm fully aware of whatever's heading my direction. And these babies have 8 hours of battery life per charge, plus 36 hours with a rechargeable case that's also capable of wireless charging. So if you're looking for earbuds that move with you, the Essential Open Earbuds are the way to go. So click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/Cody Leach Open to get up to 30% off during Raycon's Black Friday and Cyber Monday sale. That's buyraycon.com/Cody Leach Open. And thank you so much to Rincon for sponsoring today's video. The cast is great in this film. Now, there's a lot of people who are very small roles, like you get William H. Macy in like 2 or 3 scenes, and of course we've seen in the trailer Michael Cera, who's a bit of a standout here, but it's mostly Glenn Powell and Josh Brolin's show here, where you have Ben Richardson, then of course Killian, who's the main villain here, previously played by the great Richard Dawson, and both of them do a great job. Like Josh Brolin's somebody that you can always rely on to do a fantastic job, especially with darker, more villainous characters. He's great. He just got that like sinister charm to him that always works. So I enjoyed his iteration of that character a lot. But Glenn Powell is somebody that slowly has really established himself as this rising talent. You know, sometimes Hollywood likes to put somebody in front of us and they're like, here's your new movie star. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes they get overexposed. Sometimes their flaws or their limitations as an actor gets exposed very early and they get kind of pigeonholed into certain roles. And Glenn Powell is one of those guys so far that has seemingly been able to avoid that, where he's done comedy. He has done things like Hitman, that is action, drama, and comedy. And he puts on all these different faces and all these different disguises and shows his range as an actor. He can do things like action. This is a much more darker and a little bit more bleak version of action and thrills. And so he's somebody that every time that I watch him, I enjoy him more. And he's somebody who's very capable of leading a movie that was previously led by somebody with the immense charisma of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you don't feel like it's a downgrade at all.
I'm still here, you shit eaters.
I also like the way that they visualized this dystopian future. You know, sometimes we get versions of a dystopian future that just feels so far removed from our reality that it kind of blinds you to the actual reality of that being a potential future for us, or at least some versions of that. And this is a movie that I think very wisely knows their limits. There is some futuristic elements to the technology and to the way that things work, but all of the technological advancement for the most part are things that the government and the media uses. As far as society and the majority of people in the country, the world looks exactly the same, maybe a little bit more grim, a little dirtier than what we are used to seeing today. And so I think that really helps with getting you immersed in the overall theme of this movie and really getting a hold of how relevant the topics this movie is bringing to light are to today, and how this dystopian future that they're presenting us doesn't seem that far out of reach. And going along with that, I like the way that they modernize the commentary of this story to fit today's technology. Now, there's scenes and there's sequences in the original movie, and I'm sure in the novel as well, that very much play into this, like whenever they reform the final fight with Jesse Ventura in the original film to portray something that absolutely did not happen with like a primitive version of deepfake technology. And the version that we get in this iteration of The Running Man very much is this advanced, much faster, much more sinister version of that, which we already have. I mean, we have AI, we have deepfake, we have, you know, CGI replacement technology and things where it really wouldn't take very long or very much effort for somebody to take a video of somebody and make a completely false version of it that so many, an alarming amount of people would run with and believe before ever questioning the validity of it. And I think that's one of the more potent things about what this version of the story is telling us, which is, how easily manipulated so many people are by media, entertainment, the government, and how easily people will go along with things without ever really thinking for themselves. And that's what Glenn Powell's character is kind of functioning as in this, is a challenge to that. He's trying to, bump against the system where so many people are sheep and slaves to it. And he's the one saying, yo, think for yourself, fucking turn the TV off, start to ask questions. And for the first 2 acts of this film predominantly, I thought that there was a nice variety in what was going on the action side of things as well as on the thrill side of things. This is a concept that could very easily be done in a very redundant manner. And I think they did a really good job at constantly having Ben Richardson, the Glenn Powell character, shifting up his methods, shifting up his way to attack this game, where, he tries hiding out for a bit, then he tries disguises for a bit, then he's just straight out running, then he's kind of taking the fight to them, then he's using other people and their methods and their conspiracy theories. And there's all kinds of variety to the ways that he is trying to outsmart this game in ways that he comes this close to becoming the newest victim of the Running Man. And so while being a 2.5-hour near movie, for the most part, I was always engaged, always interested, always very curious what was going to happen next, and most of the movie flew by at a pretty good pace. Moving on to the mixed, the main one is that for Edgar Wright being a filmmaker that has such a distinct style, I feel like this is the least stylistic of any of his films. Now, there's definitely style. There's definitely some things here that I think he brings to it, and you could pick out moments where it's like, okay, that's an Edgar Wright moment. But usually he's the type of filmmaker where his artistic touch is all over the movie, with the humor, with the edits and the transitions, with the way that he shoots certain things, with his utilization of music and things like Baby Driver. Every one of his films previous to this one has something that is so Edgar Wright signature about it. And I found it puzzling that for a movie that has so much carte blanche for you to take it in so many different creative directions, that he decided to make this one his most mainstream and straightforward and maybe even safe of any of his films. And so I could see people who are die-hard Edgar Wright fans, which I wouldn't quite say that I am. I like his work, but I'm not a die-hard. But I could see die-hard fans being extremely disappointed in this movie because the one thing they're going for, which is the filmmaker's style, is almost entirely absent from this film. And also, it makes it feel like a much more traditional action-adventure type film, which we've had plenty of. This is a film that I think is well done. I think it's entertaining. I think it's fun, and I enjoyed myself quite a bit. But it's not something that stands out as this wildly unique experience. Like, there's nothing like Edgar Wright's Running Man. No, there's a lot of things like Edgar Wright's Running Man. And so there's a certain amount of disappointment with that. The reason why it's in the mixed and not the negative is because of what I already said. Like, I'm not a diehard Edgar Wright fan. Sometimes I think his style is a little too kooky for me. And certainly his more British films, I've always had a struggle kind of understanding British humor. Like, I've watched Shaun of the Dead like 5 different times. I'm one of the few people that does not absolutely love that movie. And so there's a possibility that the more Edgar Wrightified version of The Running Man might have been a less entertaining version of the movie for me. I really don't know until I see what that looks like. So I'm not sure where I fall on that, but I can certainly acknowledge the fact that of all the films that I've seen from Edgar Wright, this is the one that stands out the least, where if you didn't tell me this was an Edgar Wright film, I don't know if I would have been able to pick that out. But you show me Baby Driver or Hot Fuzz, and within 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, I know who made this. And kind of going along with that, I couldn't help but feel like this movie couldn't decide if it wanted to be very bleak and serious or funny and kooky. Now, there's much more bleak and serious tone in this movie than some of the more Edgar Wright-styled comedy, but when it pokes its head, it is fun, it is entertaining, but it almost feels tonally different than the rest of the film. And so I felt like maybe that was one of the reasons why he tried to subdue his style so much, because he felt like his usual style maybe would have undercut the seriousness of the message or the dystopian side of things. And maybe that's fair, but it did still feel like a movie that had a tiny bit of an identity crisis. Like, at its heart, this is a story that is very brutal. This is a very grim look at our future. This is something that could be very violent, very rated R, gore-filled, and leave you kind of a little shook by the end of it. but both versions we've gotten have leaned on some form of cheese that tries to lighten that up. And in both versions, I don't really feel like it works all that well. So this is yet again a version of this story where I don't know if I want the full comedy version or the full bleak version, but I feel like trying to mix them, we still haven't gotten that mix right. And now moving on to the negatives, and I really only have two, but they're pretty big negatives, unfortunately. They're both things that dropped my enjoyment of this film quite a bit. The first one, which was the less offensive of the two, is that there is a lot of plot conveniences and plot armor in this movie. There are numerous points where something ridiculous happens and they just want you to go along with it. Like, for a movie that is so bleak and serious, I don't think you can quite get away with that, which is why it stood out so much. So when you have like just miraculous conveniences out of nowhere where as soon as Glenn Powell's character is in the most tight situation, hey, magically there's a person there who he's never met that can help him out of this. Or, you know, he's in a situation where there's 0% survivability, but they find a way for him to survive. Like, it's one of those types of stories where I think it pushes that believability. It stretches your suspension of disbelief too far, too many times in the film. You know, one of the more frequent ones is that you have what we're supposed to understand is like the most badass militaristic hunters in the entire country that are the ones chasing Glenn Powell's character. Like, they're the ones that he has to avoid at all costs. If he gets cornered by them, he's fucked. And every time he's cornered by them, they have the marksmanship of fucking stormtroopers. Like, they're in the trailer, you see the scene where he's running down a straight hallway. They have a very clear line of sight at him, and it's like they're shooting everywhere but where he is at. And that happens like 5 times in this movie where you're like, okay, can you at least like clip his shoulder or his fucking calf muscle or something? Something to get me to think that you guys aren't the worst shooters on planet fucking Earth. Especially when every other person that they're chasing, all the other runners, as well as any of the citizens that are caught in between them and Glenn Powell, they're popping them off like fucking sharpshooters. So that was something that bugged the living piss out of me. But the significantly larger negative that I had with this film, despite how much I really enjoyed, you know, borderline loved the first 2 acts of this film, I didn't really like the third act. You know, it's hard to put into words. It's not like the third act just goes off the rails. It's not like the third act is like this significant drop in quality. I just didn't really enjoy the story direction that they went with it. You know, there's a moment in this movie, like you can trace all the way down to the second where everything kind of starts to fall for me. And this is not a spoiler, but from the moment that Glenn Powell is on this highway and takes this woman hostage in this car, everything that happens after that just didn't work for me. It was significantly less believable. It was significantly less exciting. The tension and the action and the grim side of it felt like it was absent from that side of the film. You get so many more of those plot conveniences that pop up. And so I just really didn't feel engaged at all with the last 20 to 30 minutes of this film. And it left me kind of a little sour. Like, it didn't ruin the movie. I didn't walk out pissed off, but I was like, damn, if the third act of this film matched the first 2 acts of this film, this would be one of my favorite movies of the year. And I would have no problem saying that. But that last 30 minutes, I was like, oh, damn, you were that close. And it's hard to pinpoint or really articulate exactly what is wrong with it without stepping on spoilers. It feels like there was so many exciting ideas, so many cool different places to take the character and to take the source material and give us a version of the Running Man that we have not seen on the big screen before. And all those best ideas were in the first 2 acts. And then the third act is just like, it just kind of peters out and goes a very predictable way, and also in the ways that it's not predictable kind of annoys you because it's like, that's bullshit. That's plot armor. Get the fuck out of here. And so overall, we're left with a version of The Running Man that I definitely prefer to the 1987 film. And I think it's a very fun, very exciting action movie. It's certainly going to be in the top, quarter or so of the movies that I've seen so far this year, because this is just my type of film. But it was disappointing that it felt like it was that close to greatness. It was that close to being a movie that might have even cracked my top 15 or even top 10 if they really landed the plane. So if you're a fan of the novel or a big fan of the 1987 film, I would definitely encourage you to check it out. It seems to be a bit of a divisive movie, so you may end up loving it. You may end up walking away saying, I prefer the 80s version or I prefer the novel, but it's definitely worth your time. It's a fun time in the theater that's worth checking out on the big screen. So check it out, come back, let me know what you thought of Edgar Wright's The Running Man. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2025 new release reviews. I am also going to put a 31 on 31 night of comedy up here where we talked about 3 of Edgar Wright's comedies. If you want some of my thoughts on some of his more iconic movies, please like, share, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.